All right, so let's see how can we refine this so that it works as intended. The idea behind what's being read right now is that these books must be, first of all, we've established this, all these books pertain to this user. Makes sense. But also, when we filter those books, remember, we want to filter them not only that the books belong to the current user, but this book also need to be filtered further to make sure that only the books that are set to be read, right? If you click here, if you say it started on May whatever date, they need to come up here, right? They need to show here, because at this point you see all the books are just showing in the reading list as well as in the activity right now, so what the user is actually reading. So let's change that. So back in our code, and this is actually not book details, get rid of that. Let's get rid of the book. Let's go main screen. Let's go to where we have book reading. What about here? Reading activity. So we are here. So looking at this filter here, it works fine because we are filtering these books that are coming in and passing the where book. In this case, we making sure the user ID is the same as the current user that is logged in, which we've established that. But what we also need to do is we need to filter through and check if for each book that we are receiving from our database, we need to check if certain fields, if they're null or not. Because if we click on this book, if this is null, like starting reading is null, and as well as mark as read is null, that means this book doesn't belong here because they're not reading this book, right? It belongs to the reading list. So that's what we need to do. In this case, here, where we are returning this book, we are actually checking or filtering if user ID of this book is equal to the current user ID. If that's true, then show those books. We've established that. Now we have to do something else. Well, which is, I'm going to put another and here because this is a clause that needs to be checked as well. Let's say, and if book finished reading is not null, okay, and I'm going to say again, and started reading is not null, like that. I'm going to save that. All right, let's save that. And voila, you can see we have this book. Let's click and see if that's true. Okay, so this book says here, started is not null, which means we started at some point, and then finished also is not null, which means we finished reading this book. Yet, we are showing it inside of you reading activity right now. Makes no sense. The logic makes sense because that's what we asked. So there's something else we need to think about here, okay? Which is, this logic is not for what we want at this point. Because all we want, the books that we want, are books where started reading is not null and book finished reading is null because they haven't finished reading that book. So in this case here, because that's the books that we want the books where they haven't finished yet, but they have started those books. So the checking is going to be different in that for the finished reading, this one finished reading is actually needs to be null, like that. Aha, now things change because that book that we saw, it wasn't the correct book. If I click here, you can see, yes, indeed, I started reading this book on May 18th. And mark as read is still null because we haven't said anything about this book being finished, being read. Okay, so this is good. This is really good. It's working now. If I say mark as read and just update, I shouldn't see any books here. Right? It makes sense. Of course, they're showing here, but this is not, we will fix that later. But I shouldn't see any books. Here, we should only see the books that have been started, not the books that have been finished. The next thing we need to do is also to filter through these books at the bottom here. Now, you can see that we've been working at the top here. This is the same thing as we had here in a sense that we're getting the books from database. So let's go ahead and do what we did to the row at the top here, adding the click events and everything to the rows at the bottom here, and add, of course, those nuances that will differ a little bit. Okay, so let's go back to our code. Control find, let's find reading list like that, okay. And of course, like I said, we have that stream builder, which is getting the same information as the top list. So let's work a little bit here and see. So of course, we're still getting the same reading list as we were getting before because we're just testing things out. But now what we need to do here in this reading list book, right? We need to filter it further as well. This doesn't cut it, right? We need to filter further to make sure that in this case here, all the books that we are getting must all have a null value for started reading as well as a null value for finished reading. Makes sense because that means we haven't done anything with those books. These will be the books that we add, search, and then add them. This will be the book that we show here. So I'm going to do the same thing. Add that logic. I'm going to say and book finished reading is null and started reading is also null. Looks like we need another one. Okay, let's save that. Let's just put that inside of parentheses as well, just to make it consistent. Let's go back. Aha, you can see now we're only seeing the books that fall into this category. Now we can't click and see to make sure that these are the books, but believe me, that's what's happening there. Now we need to add the click functionality that we added for the row at the top. So it's literally the same thing, which means we're going to wrap this with the Inkwell widget. So Inkwell, okay, which also means, yes, you guessed it, we need to just pass the on tap or pressed the on tap method. So say on tap. And what we're going to do when that it happens, let's say show dialog. For a builder, we are just going to pass an arrow function and pass the book details dialog, and the book is passed because we've done this before. So that's why this is really easy to actually implement. So now if you click, we're going to get that same behavior, right? If I say start reading, look what's going to happen. If I go ahead and update, all of a sudden this was sent to reading activity right now. Good. So it is working. If I do the same thing to this one, start reading, update, voila. And now reading list is empty. However, if I go and start adding other books, let's say iOS development, like this. Let's just get this one here. Sure, why not? And maybe this one. And we go back. All those books should be at the bottom there. Just like that, we have the functionality working perfectly.